you look at high achievers, entrepreneurs that are crushing it, and you see more and more guys that end up in like failing relationships or in divorces. If you were to put your 2 cents on it, what do you think the reason is that these guys who have a lot of things that are put together are in relationships that end up either crumbling or falling beneath them at some point?
I think if you want to narrow it down and keep it simple, it's one, the first thing is a selection process is picking the right gal. And then the second thing is, even if you pick the right gal and you don't understand female nature, you will still have a very strong probability of her wanting to untie the knot or to leave the marriage, take the kids, half your stuff, the typical sort of divorce grinder story that most guys go through. So those would be the two main things.
Let's dig into the selection part. How can you plan that out? Because of course it's easy to be like, okay, this woman didn't work out and this guy didn't work out, but it works both ways too, right? Like, is the guy always there? Is the woman always there? Like, how do you think about that on a long enough time horizon?
I think for selection, it's time plus observation will give you some clarity, right? You need to observe the behaviors, watch what she says versus what she does. Of course, in my first book, I talk about the red flags that you want to try to avoid, minimize as many as possible. If they exist, there's some of them that you could perhaps have her work on. In the second book, which comes out later on this year, I've got a chapter on green flags and sort of like the management of long-term relationships in there as well.
Yep.
So there's other components that you have to sort of continue to manage as time goes on. Like everybody thinks, you'll just get married in the eyes of God or a certain religion or something like that. And because the covenants are all strong and, family sets sort of boundaries and frames around that, it should all work out. You just do the right thing. And, she'll enthusiastically want to be with you in a perpetuity. And it doesn't usually work out that way because women are inherently, I'm going to use the word difficult to manage over the long term for most guys, right? Most guys don't understand female nature, and it usually gets the best of them. That's why you'll see a lot of guys are like, she was enthusiastic and loved me and messaged me every day, and we had monkey sex hanging from the chandelier like 3 times a day, and it was awesome. And it's like the same guy 7 years later, after a couple of kids, is sitting down on his computer Googling, how do I get my wife to sleep with me, or signing up for the next OnlyFans girl sort of thing. So there's so there's always going to be a standard degradation in the quality of the relationship over time. A lot of people argue, well, that doesn't necessarily have to be true. Look at me, blah, blah, blah. It's perfect. No, like every relationship goes through some form of a degradation. There's this sequence of events that men go through, which is called betatization through 1,000 concessions, right? Is what I've coined it. And they essentially get to this point where they become less attractive to their wife over a prolonged period of time, because they're saying yes to too many things. They're letting her get away with too many things. Women will constantly competency test men, right? It's in their nature. If they weren't with the best guy that they could get 1,000 years ago, it could spell death for her and her kids, right? So she's constantly testing you. She wants to make sure that you've got it figured out, right? You don't have to tell her exactly what step A, B, C, and D is sort of thing, but she has to feel like, I'm going to use the word feel like, you have it all figured out.
Do you think it goes both ways as well, though?
No, I think that's a modern trope that a lot of modern feminists or like media or bloggers or even like YouTubers will start to say, well, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If it works for him, then what about her, sort of thing. And it's like, it's a different game.
Just want to take one quick break to ask you one question. Have you been enjoying these episodes? Because if you have, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel so that more people can see these episodes and be influenced to build an online business this year. Thank you. I would say like not necessarily like the guy as in like it works for him, and more so like guys give up on their standards. Like I'm 28, right? A lot of guys that I went to school with that took 9-to-5 jobs, went to corporate jobs, they're like fat, broke, overweight. They're not like pushing on. So like these guys like are getting sloppy, right?
Yeah.
And they get sloppy over time. So my kind of just approach to this was like, do these guys also just get lazy in a relationship too, is that there's also a component of that whereby they're not actually like trying their best and trying to be a really fucking good guy, right? Like you're into the gym, boxing, everything 24/7. Likewise, I want to hold myself to an exceptionally high standard, but I just know that standard is not out there all the time. Like that is just a matter of fact, right?
Yeah, I think we get comfortable with the known is what it boils down to. You're familiar with each other. You just get comfortable and you kind of slide into habits and behaviors and do a little bit less. I've said that there's 3 things that usually contribute to the countdown to the end of a relationship: proximity, familiarity, and exclusivity. And the more of that you give her, the less likely it is that you're going to have a profoundly enjoyable relationship over a long period of time.
Can you explain?
Well, proximity is being close, right? So I get criticized for saying this, but it's, the truth. The closer you are to each other, the more you know about each other. You're very familiar with your habits. You get to know the schedule sort of thing. Like one of the most successful marriages that I've seen is run over 30 years, a good friend of mine. And I asked him, one day I said, what do you think is a contributor to the success of your marriage? Because they have genuinely, like, if you see this couple, they're in love with each other. She adores him. You can see her looking at him when he's talking about something, and she has like a sparkle in her eye over him. And he said, well, because this guy was an entrepreneur and he owned a toy company. So he was constantly flying around and going to Hong Kong and the Chinese factories and doing a lot of travel. He was out of the house about half of the month. And he said, probably the travel, probably the fact that we weren't close to each other for a lot of the months. And she basically did all the home stuff, raising the kids, like the pink jobs. And he would go out and sort of do the blue jobs, like making it rain, making the connections, being influential, making money, solving problems, sort of things. So that's the proximity component of the equation. The familiarity is like, the more a woman knows about you, again, your habits, your behaviors, where you are all the time, who you're with, what you're doing with who you're with, it erases some of the novelty. It erases some of the unknown. There has to be a little bit of competition anxiety with women when it comes to a long-term relationship, because women want what other women want. And if other women don't want you, and other men don't want to be you, then she's going to have a hard time looking at you going, oh, this guy's a giant. I love the man that I'm with, sort of thing. So there's that element. And then there's, of course, exclusivity, which is boiling down to sexual exclusivity. And I think that whether you choose to exercise the option is not relevant. I think that the threat needs to exist. Okay. So whether it's real or imagined, the idea of him having options that he can exercise needs to exist. And that's not a two-way street, by the way. That's a one-way street, because men and women are completely different. So the last thing a man wants is to contemplate or think that she's off doing something with another guy, right? Like nobody wants the well poisoned, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, of course. I think it's just the fact that with the fact if someone is not always there, it just shows like basically the value of the relationship, right? Because there's like absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? So they're away. Absolutely. So as a result, there's more of like a lore, there's more of imagination as well coming into the relationship, which is like, oh, like, I'm excited for you to come back. It's 2 weeks, it's 1 week. It's funny you said that, because myself and my wife Elise, she's American, I'm Irish, and we met just coming up to pre-COVID initially. And when COVID hit, she was based in America and I was based in Ireland. And Ireland put a ban on Americans and Americans put a ban on Ireland. So we had to like figure things out. And it was like 2 months before we saw each other, 3 months before we saw each other. We like figured out, went to Mexico at some point, then we went to Thailand, and then we went to Bali, and we had to figure out all this like random shit. But that's what like kept things really interesting, because most people would have said long distance relationships didn't work. But it was the fact that I was focused on my podcast. I was working in consulting at the time, would you believe? But that actually added to the relationship so much. And that's an interesting dilemma, right? Whereas most people just move in with each other and then the standards drop and you become way too known with each other's different bad habits, should I say.
Yeah. It's not often that a long distance relationship works though, right? I think it only works where she sees you as her best option. All right, guys, I really hope that you enjoyed that clip. If you want to check out the full-length podcast episode, you can find that right over here. Also, make sure you visit my website over here where you'll find my supplements, the opportunity to book me privately one-on-one for coaching, and most importantly, my new School of Unplugging, which you'll find on the Courses tab. Newer to the channel? Hit subscribe.